Welcome to Poor Decisions of GTM, where we share sips, slips, and tips in an unfiltered discussion that helps GTM leaders move from mediocre to top shelf quality. Join us as we spill our tea on lessons learned on both what not to do and what we can do to produce better results going forward. I'm Elizabeth Italiano.
And I'm Indu Sudhakar.
And we're the hosts of Poor Decisions of GTM. Today, I'm really excited that we are joined by Kyle Racki, CEO of Proposify. Kyle, would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Kyle Racki, co-founder and CEO of Proposify. I don't know what else you want to know.
Also, amazing musician. He is I don't know, I think he played all the instruments in Club Sunday.
No, we got a band. So I stick mostly on guitars and keys.
Oh, guitars and keys. Got it. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. We will dive right in. But for anybody who isn't familiar with Proposify, it is a proposal software that's pretty fantastic. And Kyle shares a lot of his lessons learned on his LinkedIn. So if you don't follow him on LinkedIn, highly encourage you to do so. He's really generous with what he has learned in his journey of being a CEO and founder of Proposify. So let's get into some of the questions. Enough from me. The premise of today is that we'll be sharing some slips and tips over a drink together. Before we get to that, let's address one of the most important questions, Kyle, and that's what are you sipping on today as we spill our tea with our audience?
So I recently came across Bellwoods Brewery, and they have a non-alcoholic beer called Stay Classy IPA. It is, it's 0.5. It's delicious. Tastes like a nice craft beer.
Oh,
I'm gonna try that. I've been getting into the non-alcoholic beer. My favorite recently has been Athletic Brewing. Upside Dawn is the name of the favorite of mine, my go-to choice, which I think is really clever marketing. Upside Dawn, you know?
Mm,
Yeah. Anyway,
very good.
but today I am drinking Cove Soda, which is a Canadian-based company and located in Nova Scotia, which is where Kyle and I are both originally from. So I thought it was appropriate, but it's also a probiotic drink, which is good for gut health. And because we know the stress of GTM mistakes and fuck ups, I thought that, we can all do with a little bit of gut health improvement. So that's what I'm drinking today.
awesome. And I'm doing an awful job of product advertising here, but I am drinking Blue Lotus Masala Chai tea. I was going to have a shot of espresso, like pre 10 a.m. would have been my second. Decided I need to take down the caffeine intake a little bit, so stuck with this. Not as good as my mom makes it, but very, very close.
We're a wild group with all of our
I
non-alcoholic
know.
drinks.
We're talking about how we have to start scheduling these things at like 4 o'clock to make it feel a little bit more appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's get into the sips and tips. And Indu, I'll hand it over to you to ask the first question.
So, Kyle, a big reason we love having you here today is you've been really vocal about mistakes that you've made or witnessed in the past and what you've learned from them. A few months ago, you posted about how you cost a company 5 years of progress and revenue because you had prematurely put a high-performing IC into a leadership role. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that experience and sort of what the learning moments were from it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a really important topic and conversation that you guys are starting. So appreciate it. Appreciate you having me here. I want to start with I think when we talk about fuck ups and mistakes and all these things, most of them are pretty local in terms of you can screw up anything and it's not going to hurt you, right? Like you can, the actual cost of mistakes are pretty low and they're really important to have, because if you're not making any mistakes, then you're not learning. But I think the ones that can really cost you are the ones that are not easily reversible. The whole Jeff Bezos thing talks about type 1 and type 2 decisions. In general, leaders should be giving type 2 decisions to their ICs and not trying to make every decision, because if it's pretty easy to reverse, you can just go in through a different door if you pick the wrong one. That's not a problem. There are some doors, though, that once you go through them, there's no going back. And those are the type one decisions that really a leader needs to make, and they need to make very carefully. So when I've talked about the mistake of putting people in roles that they're not ready for, it is reversible, but only if you don't keep them there for too long to do too much damage. So I think it's a very common thing. I've seen it happen with a lot of founders that I've coached and mentored over the years where they do a similar thing. And in fact, I just had a question yesterday from somebody that I posted on LinkedIn that addressed the exact same thing. So she asked me, hey, Kyle, I lead a group of developers. There's a junior developer on my team who's showing a lot of leadership capabilities in a group that's more senior. I'm considering moving him to a leadership management position. What's your advice? And so my advice was very based on my own experience, but an experience that I've seen played out time and time again with other startups and founders, which is you have somebody great on your team who's really good at getting stuff done. Maybe they were even your first hire. And so they helped you, they were almost like a partner. And that's certainly the experience I had, where the first developer I hired for Proposify was very skilled. And I kind of automatically gave him the CTO title, even though he hadn't led teams or scaled organizations before. It was just like, wow, we're in this together. We're doing it. You're kind of like a co-founder. So just be our CTO, lead the whole tech division. But then what I started to find as we grew the team was, we were initially very successful with, having a great product and being able to acquire lots of users and scale. But then I think the lack of experience started to show over time, right? Of like not really knowing how to recruit great people, not really being able to lead them effectively, and not making great decisions that are going to help us scale into the future because he's just never been there before. And so what I eventually got to was, I think 5 years maybe into the company, there was enough disgruntled developers and technical debt holding us back, and we weren't moving fast enough anymore, that I finally had to say, look, I need to bring someone else in. Like, it's clear you're over your head and you can't do it. And I think he agreed, and he did stay at the company for a period of time. But when I said we cost ourselves 5 years of progress, that was really the last 5 years where it's been very hard to move and make actual product innovations because of that legacy that has been left behind.
Yeah. And I think it's something we actually hear quite a bit too, like two-pronged here. So moving someone into a frontline manager position, for example, from an IC position, there are very different skills and traits that are required there. But also what you touched on earlier, which is sort of the stage the company is at, right? Your Jack or Jill of all trades at the very beginning of the company starting might not necessarily be the appropriate person as you start to scale. So those nuances are really important to see. In that particular situation, I know you mentioned you made the appropriate changes. Was there anything else you did to sort of rectify that mistake and gain a little bit more momentum?
No, I made an even worse mistake after that. So what I thought that I was missing was like, okay, I've got somebody who's scrappy and they are good at getting stuff done, but they don't really know how to lead and scale an organization. So then I thought, okay, what I need is a VP with patches on their elbows. I don't know why I use that visual metaphor, but like,
I'm right there with you.
I feel that. I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
So then I wanted to find somebody who's been a VP of engineering before in larger organizations and kind of knows how that goes. And what I did was I just over-indexed on the opposite, and I went too far the other direction, where it was somebody who was not as close to the technology, was very much a manager of people, but there were certain technical decisions that needed to be made by somebody who had been there and could actually work closely with the teams, because by that point we had built an engineering culture that was really used to being afraid to do anything, like being afraid to make moves, because there was, you touch the code over here and something blows up over here. So it was a lot of maintenance and keeping the lights on, but not really making moves forward. And by the time we built up that kind of an engineering culture, you needed somebody who could really come in and actually make changes, and not somebody who was just sort of like quiet in the background, guiding the teams, but not actually making those decisions. Mm-hmm. So I ended up having the wrong person in that seat for I want to say another 3 years, where I probably knew a year in, this wasn't the right hire. He's a great person, will be good somewhere else, but isn't who we need. And again, I just sat on it for too long, and I only in the last year have gotten like the perfect person in the role who's actually driving change within the organization.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we see like not just in technical roles, we see this in sales as well. Like, so when you think of a startup and who usually gets into that first leadership role in sales? Your top
That
performers.
salesperson.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So, but they're not necessarily equipped for the people leadership, the coaching, making the tough decisions. And, sometimes they'll manage up more than they manage down or manage down more than they manage up. And yeah, so it's, your particular situation is on the technical side, but we see it across all roles. So, knowing that you're just kind of coming out of the other side of it, how did you overcome the mistake? Or what are you seeing today where you're starting to see the fruits of the labor in the last year overcome the mistake?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll shout out Mark Lacombe, who's our VP engineering at Proposify. I think what he's been able to do in his, he's just been, I think last week was a year at the company. He's really transformed the department, and I've seen it in the way that the energy that he brings to the teams, because he's very much focused on like the shortest path to value. SVP is kind of like the acronym he uses, and I see other engineers using it as well, of like shortest path to value. So he's really helped kind of turn that culture around of like, it's very easy for engineers to try to envision the perfect solution and try to over engineer things. And so his whole thing is like, okay, let's help our customers today. What is the quickest path to help them? And we can worry about the other stuff afterwards. Like we're not gonna the example that he uses is like, if a village, if there's two villages that need to trade goods and services, and there's a big jungle in the way, you don't build a 6-lane highway to get there. You carve a path first, and then once you kind of see that's working, you can over time build that up and make it much more robust. But you don't try to start there. So I think that change in the culture and the mindset has done a lot. And then the other thing is, because he's worked at scale and he's worked at like large organizations. His last job, he had, I think, 100 people within his department that reported under him. So he's been able to see like high traffic websites with lots of transactions. So he understands from an architectural standpoint what is required in order to scale. And what he was able to do was articulate an engineering technical vision that matched my product vision, and then not try to build the perfect thing from the beginning, but to look for opportunities with things we're doing to move the architecture along, to be able to repay some of that technical debt. And so that's kind of how we've been able to do it. And I'd love to say like we are in a totally different place with our product. I mean, good things take time, but we're in a much better place than we were.
Yeah, and you mentioned helping customers. I think that goes to show, what is unfortunately an overused saying around customer centricity. And every company says they're customer centric, but then when you really get into it, they're not. But if that's sort of the ethos of your technical leader and your product leader, like that's where I think a lot of customer centricity really is rooted. Because if you're not focused on that from the product perspective, then everything else is, pushing a rock uphill.
Well, a point to that, that I want to make is, I mean, that caused a lot of animosity, a lot of frustration, a lot of resentment between departments over time, right? Because you've got the customer success folks who are on the front lines managing customer complaints and saying, customer wants to do this. And when engineers are too far removed from the business value and the customer value, it's easy for them to say, well, we're not doing that right now. It's too hard. It's too complicated. There's a lot of technical reasons why we can't. And I think getting the engineers closer to the customers, being able to have them jump on calls with them, which we started to do, and even just really being able to say like, okay, how important is this problem? And, is it something that's affecting one person that we can do a workaround for? Great. But if it really is, it's risking our biggest accounts from churning, or it's really problematic for a number of customers, then it's just, I think Mark was very good at just saying, is this important? Should we do it now? Yes. And if the answer is yes, okay, then we're going to build a war room, get people together, carve out 2 or 3 weeks if that's what it takes, and we're just going to solve the problem. So really just like deciding which problems you need to solve, but not sort of just always passing the buck because it's like, no, it's too hard. I don't want to look at it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the voice of the customer is some of the best data you could ever have to inform those decisions. But also you need to be able to have a unified team that's aligned on those decisions being made on what's being built in product, how you're going to market. And I think that's a big point of cohesion that a lot of companies miss when they're rolling out go-to-market. I am curious. So if we talked a little bit about the hiring and how you kind of recovered from that, if you're giving advice to go-to-market leaders about how they can proactively make sure they're having the right hiring decisions made, how would you go about giving that advice? Like, what would you pressure test?
Yeah, so I mean, to make it clear too, the hiring challenge or not having the right people on the team was not just relegated to product engineering. And I've gone through similar things with our marketing leaders and our sales leaders over the years. So I think that there's a lot of the same mistakes were made just in other departments. It just didn't impact us as badly as the engineering one did. Um, Same thing, right? If you're the first time marketer, promoting them to CMO probably isn't a great idea if they're 3-4 years experience and have only worked at 1 or 2 other places, right? So like the advice that I gave the person who asked about the junior dev is like, it's not that you don't promote them, it's just give them challenges, give them special projects. If they're a really high performer and they're really ambitious and they want to grow, if they're a superstar, like definitely challenge them, but you don't have to give them top shelf title right away just to keep them around. Especially where the more senior members of the team will probably resent that, even if they don't have necessarily the leadership skills. They're just like, who's this whippersnapper, telling me what to do?
Yeah.
So I think they need time to build technical skills and leadership skills. And for somebody to be a manager or a leader, they have to be able to do the job, right? If they haven't been in the role before, it's really hard for them to coach other team members because they don't know what great looks like.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you don't want to hire Mr. or Mrs. Dashboards either, right? And I've made that mistake of like taking your sales leader who's been at a big logo, a big CRM that everybody knows, and just instantly assuming that, oh, well, they know how to build a sales process and a sales team because they worked at a big company.
Yeah.
We've addressed it already, Elizabeth, but I think it's worth mentioning again is like these people have worked in places that already have a strong brand and strong processes built that they're coming into, and they're more or less sailing the ship that's built for them.
Right.
And I always use the analogy of builders versus sailors. The startup folks are the ones building the ship, don't know how to sail them, and the people who can sail the built ships are people who are like working at big companies. They're just never the same person, and you need to know who are you hiring. So if you need to build a brand new sales process from the ground up that doesn't exist, you need a builder. You need somebody who's maybe doesn't have the big company experience. Your first sales rep or your first few sales reps, if they've come from a big brand and they are used to just having an influx of demand and everybody buys Salesforce, they've been playing the game on easy mode, right? I'm not saying that their job isn't hard or that they lack skills. Certainly they do. They just haven't worked on hard mode, which is banging down the doors of people who have never heard who you are.
Yeah.
Yes. And working in wartime versus peacetime is a lot different as well. So, in thinking in regards to the, growth at all costs era, money was cheap and sales were relatively easy. And now you're fighting for every deal across a big buying committee, where 2 years ago you might be selling to one director of enablement that had a budget. So those are very different things as well. And, to your point, it's not that they don't have skills, it's that their skill set might be different and a better fit for something. So it's not like a right or wrong thing. It's more of what skills are best suited for what stage.
Yeah.
So that's something, we talk a lot about as well. And to pivot a little bit and kind of go on.
Hello.
One
Um,
more week and they're back to school.
all good. Well, my dogs visited earlier and your son. So, oh, go ahead. It looks like you
No,
were.
no, I'm sorry. You already started down a road, but I just wanted to add about the hiring piece because I think it's in a really important piece we missed was that when it comes to executives on your team, you also have to have, I think, a pretty strict timeline in place because the challenge, like with ICs, you can pretty well find very immediately what kind of an impact they're having because you see the work and you see the
Right.
impact of the work. With leaders, it takes more time and it's sort of like the light from distant stars. But the mistake that I made was giving way too much time and thinking that, well, changes to our sales process or changes to our engineering process will take time to play out. But if you don't see effects within 90 days, like if literally you hire a sales leader or a marketing leader and they come in and within the first 3 months, like nothing changes, there's no metric that's been touched, they never will, like it will never move. It doesn't matter if they're there for 5 years, it's not ever going to get better.
Mhm.
And so I think that whole idea of like fire fast does ring true, even with executives, which is they should be able to come in and at least find a little bit of broken glass on the floor that needs picking up. And if you can't identify any broken glass, then you're not looking hard enough and you probably aren't the right fit at the company.
I subscribe to that as well. And, from a human perspective, of course, I feel a little bad, thinking firing fast, but at the same time, why prolong the pain for any parties that are involved? And at the end of the day, we have an obligation to be successful for our customers. So we are an ongoing concern and for other employees. So that kind of is more of an existential thing. But yeah, I do subscribe to the fire fast. And if you know what signals to look for, you can identify them pretty quickly. Um, so changing gears a little bit, but I think it does go off a little bit on what we talked about or what I mentioned before in the growth at all costs era. So, thinking back 2 years and more ago, VC investment was the popular thing. However, now there's a lot of conversation around bootstrapping versus raising through VC investment. And I think we can agree that, since what I call the implosion of the growth at all costs era, that we're now seeing the effects of a lot of really poor decisions and a lot of bad mistakes. And there's been a lot of fallout in the last few years, and some of that in the form of layoffs. So you've talked about this previously around having outside capital and that it can create a culture that's actually the opposite of scrappiness and where every problem can be solved with one more hire. So I'd love to hear from you around some of the pros and cons that you see around raising outside capital that founders should be aware of.
Well, I think it's exactly that, right? So if people, hadn't seen that episode, I had talked about the, when you're scrappy and you're bootstrapped, everybody is used to doing more with less. But then when you raise, it can take a little bit of time to shift people's mindset over to the like, okay, no, you don't have to, get your nephew to design that promo banner for you, whatever it is, right? Like we can spend some money.
Yeah.
But then sometimes it swings too hard in the other direction, which is, everybody just gets used to having lots of cash and it's never a deal and there's no scrutiny around it anymore. So then everybody's just like, oh, I'm going to buy this tool, I'm going to buy that tool. And suddenly you've got 5 different software tools that do the same thing because departments all have their own preferences. Or you're hiring people because you're like, oh, I could really use somebody to do this thing, take this thing off my plate. I'm going to hire somebody. And you find like they really don't have 40 hours of work, a week of work to keep them busy, but somehow the time gets filled because they're there, right? And we had this happen, right, where somebody wanted to hire like a knowledge base writer or promote somebody into a knowledge base, like create new roles essentially for them. And within 6 months, they had 4 people reporting under them. I was like, well, I thought we needed somebody just to write the knowledge base article. Well, they got busy, so then they hired 4 junior writers to, manage it all, right? So it becomes a nightmare. And 6 months after that, we had to do layoffs, right? We had to cut 25% of the company because this was even before SaaS got weird and funky and downturned, right? It was just like we're burning way too much cash. We're burning 400K a month, and we literally will just be out of business next year at this rate. So we have to cut. And I think though, even obviously it was hard, and we felt for the people that were outgoing. The market was really hot there still, so people found jobs pretty quickly afterwards. But also, it was an opportunity for us to really stare hard at the culture we had built, and to be able to say, like, we need to become a more scrappy company again, because we're not going to go out and raise more cash just to keep the lights on. We need to get to profitability, and we need to start executing and doing more with less. And that was the opportunity to start bringing in some level of processes around evaluating things and cutting software tools and scrutinizing hires and just being able to make better decisions so we can operate better as a company. I think that's something that comes from the bootstrap mentality that now SaaS companies are being forced to do, because they just can't raise, and they will die if they don't raise. So they have to adopt this scrappier mindset.
On that note, with the scrappy mindset, I know you mentioned a couple of things like having processes in place, having some sort of criteria for hiring and vetting. If you were talking to a GTM leader who has taken money and they still want to maintain that same level of scrappiness, what would you tell them to do? Like, what would your playbook be there?
Well, I mean, it always depends on the department, right? But I think there's a number of tools at our disposal that I think, if you want to get scrappy, you can make better use of. So, like, you don't need full-time hires for everything within the organization. Marketing is a really good one to look at, because there's so many subset specialties in marketing. You probably don't need an email campaign manager full-time in your company, right? That's something that somebody on your team can wear that hat. They can take that on as an accountability. And if there's certain skills that you're lacking internally that you don't have, that's where contractors and freelancers and agencies can be great. Because you can say, like, hey, we're going to get a Fiverr team plan, and when we need thumbnails designed for YouTube, we're going to just pay $60 and get somebody on Fiverr to do it. We don't actually need a full-time, a designer to do that necessarily. So I think it's just about being able to find solutions to your problems, and being able to, not try to. Here's the thing, like, I try to get people on this train of, like, don't anticipate demand down the road, or don't anticipate needs and try to hire ahead of them. Wait until it's painful. Feel the pain. Like, well, yeah, no, at this rate, we're going to get really busy in 6 months, and we're going to need somebody. So now's the time to hire. Like, no, just feel pain for a bit.
Yeah.
Like, let the fire burn. Allow, like, not every fire can be put out.
Yeah.
And that's the trick as business owners that we need to learn, is, like, there will always be more fires to put out than we have water in our bucket. So it is about choosing which fire we choose to put out. I said choose too many times there, but you get the idea.
No, yeah, it makes complete sense. Prioritizing what the biggest fires are. And also, I think a lot of times you don't know exactly what you need until you're under fire. So anticipating those needs can be kind of uninformed until you've actually gone through that testing period and you're like, okay, these are where I actually have my deficiencies and don't have a team to support. So I love that approach. Test, and then also prioritize afterwards.
Yeah. And feeling the pain, it's so true, because you can then, really think through, where am I feeling the pain the most? And this really resonates with me right now, because literally last night and this morning, we've been talking about bringing on a VA. And it was because, like, sure, could I have probably brought one on a few months ago? Yes, but would I have really known where I would have needed the help the most? Probably not. But yesterday I spun my wheels on a lot of content marketing, video editing, things that, quite frankly, I suck at. I am the worst video editor in the world. But anyway, all to say that, like, I felt the pain, and I waited long enough so I feel the pain. So now I have an exact list of, okay, these are the types of things that I can get support on. I now know that putting things in Podia, which is our LMS, and some other elements, this is where I can get some help with. So it frees me up for, some of the more strategic things, the client work and that sort of thing. And so, that's my example, but I think every business has that, is like, where are you feeling the pain? And now, okay, what can you trade off that, is not even just for time, but for, like, context switching and for expertise? Like, my time should not be spent at this point on video editing. There's other things like sales and client work that, that's where my time should be. So anyway, I feel that example, because yes, if I hadn't have leaned into the pain, I probably wouldn't have had really much success a few months ago, but now I
And now you
do.
know what you're looking for too, right? Because you've done the job. It's like, you own a restaurant and you're not a good cook, so but you're cooking all the food. It might be kind of shitty, but now when you bring in a chef, you can appreciate what they're doing because you're like, oh, that's how you do it. Oh, that's
Yeah.
what good. Like now you know what great video editing looks like because you know how you struggled with it.
Yeah, yeah. And I can't wait to see the before and afters of like the videos that I
Yeah.
and the ones that I'm sure will be far superior with the editing. I mean, Indu does a much better job than I do, but yeah, I think feeling the pain, and something that I've taken from running is a running coach said to me once, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think if you're a founder, if you are part of a early stage startup, I think you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's, yeah, otherwise, like if you're resting on your laurels, then that's a sign.
Yeah, the pain train. I know David Cancel always said that starting a new company is just like you're masochist. Like it's just pain.
So true.
100%.
What is kind of fascinating is you touched a little bit on kind of being constrained in that early stage does have benefits to it. Like you find out how much people can actually do, where hidden talents are maybe. What would you say some of the other benefits are of being in that stage of being resource constrained?
I actually think resource constraints are great for strategy because strategy is saying no, it's not saying yes, right? The companies that have really great strategies have decided the path that they want to take and the lane that they want to be the best in. And by doing that, they're saying, we don't want to be this. We're choosing to not enter this market. We're choosing to not try to sell to these types of customers. Absence of those choices is just absence of strategy. So when you have virtually unlimited resources and you can choose to say yes to everything, what it ends up being is just one big garbage pile of stuff happening. And then you're confused in the market and it's not clear who are you best for and who do you work with. It makes it harder. Your go-to-market becomes much more complex because now you've got a dozen products that sell to a dozen different personas. So having resource constraints are great for being able to say, look, we can only afford to do one thing this year.
Yeah.
And we've chosen and we've looked at the data and we think this is the bet that we need to make. So we're going to go all in on this one thing. And that will usually make everything else easier because now everyone's aligned around one key product or feature or message for one audience. It just makes choice easier.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I don't know about you, Liz, but when we have gone into consulting engagements, I'd say 80% of them, the big problem we're seeing is you're doing way too much. You are just targeting every ICP under the sun, trying to sell every part of your product to everybody. So I can appreciate that sort of being nimble and scrappy. It forces you to buckle down and you don't have the resources to tackle everything under the sun. Let's focus on one strategy, pressure test it and see what comes of it.
Yeah, I think what you said around strategy, and saying no, the relationship between strategy and saying no is honestly one of the wisest things I think I have heard anybody say, because it is, I mean, and I'm not just saying that to like, flatter you because you're a
You're
guest
good.
here, but honest to God, I do, because so many people and even experienced leaders confuse process and strategy and don't think through that choice. So that is going to be one of my favorite sound bites, I think, on the podcast. Everything's been great, but I think so many leaders really need to think about that and think, okay, it's a choice. There's things we need to say no to. So yeah, that's a mic drop right there.
I can't
So,
drop this because it's connected.
oh,
Oh,
yeah, and mine's attached. Yeah, it'd be a little awkward. Crash on the floor, including the camera. But anyway, so speaking of choices, something else that you talked about quite a bit on LinkedIn is moving up market. And so you've discussed how when you moved up market initially, you weren't quite ready. And there's some lessons that you learned there. So what can you share with us around what you've learned on moving up market, and what should other founders and leaders consider before they do?
Yeah, it's funny with SaaS companies, they almost always want the opposite of what they have, right? So like companies that start enterprise eventually want to go down market because they get sick of the 12-month sales cycles. And with SaaS, it's like if you've built a pretty good product-led, self-serve go-to-market, what starts to hurt you is your churn, right? You're like small customers, they churn, they don't pay you a lot. You need to get a ton of them into your product in order to grow revenue and scale. So, I mean, going up market is usually a good sound strategy for most SaaS companies, and I think it is for us. The mistake though that I made was again, once you have some resources, and to be clear, like we didn't just attack it once we raised money. We did dip our toes in the water a little bit, but even then I think we still hired prematurely. If I was doing it over again, I think the founder really needs to do the sales, because much like starting a brand new business from scratch, like you need to talk to customers, talk to the market, figure out what people need. And I think we were just too quickly to assume that, okay, we've got lots of people using our self-serve product. Let's just go after bigger companies. And what we realized is that there were three big things that needed to change. And it took us years to figure this out, right? Like our positioning was totally wrong. So even if we were selling the exact same product, because it was to a different audience, they perceived the value differently. So when we were selling generate beautiful proposals and get faster sign off, like that message doesn't resonate with the mid-market, because actually what they buy us for is to lock things down so their sales reps don't send the wrong thing and get visibility, like what's actually going out the door. It's not to just spit proposals out really quickly. So we went through a whole positioning exercise with April Dunford, but that took time. And I think we probably could have figured it out earlier if we weren't just trying to throw sales reps at the problem. Product needs to change a lot. So the enterprise buyer or the mid-market buyer comes in, what they care about is like how it works with Salesforce, how, what the single sign-on looks like, what the privacy, do you have or do you have all the security badges? Like those are the things that kill the deal. It isn't even really the product itself. So that takes time to invest in. And then the pricing, right? Like we were selling, essentially we had no pricing model that could scale with the customer. So an enterprise buyer, the most they could pay us is like $5,000 a year, right? So we had to figure out what our pricing model was so that we were actually able to capture the value that we could deliver to larger organizations. Once we switched to a per seat price and we put the right features on the right plans, then we were able to drive up the ACV. And now we've got some customers that are in the six-figure territory able to sustain that size of customer, but without the right pricing model, it's impossible for your reps to make money, and therefore the business doesn't make money.
Right. And then you have a lot of unhappy reps, and that impacts the culture. And yeah, there's a big chain effect and ripple effect there. So you mentioned something around founders doing sales, and I've come across a number of startups that they might be all technical founders, and they, they're interested in solving a certain problem. They've built a product that they like, but nobody wants to do the actual sales. And from what I've seen, the startups that don't have a founder who really wants to do sales are generally not as successful. Would your advice be to find another co-founder that is passionate about sales, or like what would your advice be there?
My advice would actually be for technical founders to learn how to sell. I would prefer a technical founder learn sales. They have a much higher likelihood of succeeding in that than a sales founder learning how to code. And the reason I say that is because I think for technical founders, a lot of the fear around sales is mostly in their head. It's not like, if you're a technical founder, then you probably appreciate really good processes. And I think what a lot of these technical founders miss, or they don't realize, is that sales is not about just having this natural born skill or this ability to talk to people, which they think it is. Or like, oh, I'm stranger danger, I don't like talking to people.
Yeah.
And actually really good sales is about having a good process and knowing how to do discovery and knowing how to ask really good questions and be able to disqualify quickly when you know that you can't help them. And, so I think a lot of these technical founders just need really good frameworks and training to be able to do it, but they are going to be more successful at it than just trying, again, to throw a person at the problem, bring someone in, give them a bunch of equity in the company, and maybe they suck anyway.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And often technical leaders, founders, they are good at discovery because they have to ask questions to build a product. It's translating that into, I guess, the sales mindset, or not even mindset, but the comfort, like you said, that, getting over the stranger danger. So yeah, that's I love
I'll
that.
throw, I'll shout out. I'm not sure you must know him. Tapajate Das Tukan.
Oh yes,
You
yes,
know him
yes,
on
yes,
LinkedIn?
yes.
Just sold his company Lead Sift a couple of years ago, and I've known him for like a decade. And he was like computer science grad who was just all like super technical guy. And the last like 5 years at his company, he was doing all the sales. Like he just learned how to do it and was really, really good at it. So I just think technical founders need to realize it is a learnable skill. You don't have to be a born salesperson.
Another great soundbite. Yeah, so I think, yeah, it's something to focus on, and whether it's getting a coach or an advisor that can help you along with that, because somebody's got to do it when you're starting out a company.
And
But
no one can do it better than the founder.
Yeah, that's
yes,
true.
yes, that is true. The founders that are obsessed with the problem, obsessed with getting it off the ground, like that's, yeah, where the passion is. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The last question that I had, that I really wanted to get your thoughts on, are based on a study that Proposify recently released. So it's a quick guide to doubling like your close rate. And who does not want to double their close rate? So it reveals that proposals viewed by more than one stakeholder almost double the close rate, and that proposals which undergo revisions have a 52% higher close rate on average. So the stakeholder one wasn't surprising to me, because we know that multi-threading, and we talk about that a lot, is going to help you close deals, particularly now where there's large buying committees. The revisions for the proposals, not that surprised me to a degree, but 52% is quite high. Like that is really significant. So would love to hear a little bit from you more on that, around like how a sales team can, strategically ensure that the proposals reach and engage multiple decision makers, and any best practices that you'd recommend for fostering that buyer committee collaboration, so that there is that collaboration to do the revision, to boost the likelihood of closing a deal.
Yeah, the revisions one I think is I mean possibly a bit misleading, right? Because I think it has a much higher close rate because the prospect was engaged enough to bother to ask for a revision, right? So it's sort of natural that I think if you're going back and you're making changes, obviously the buyer is interested in, changing the terms or changing the pricing, so they're more likely to be a serious buyer versus one who's like, send me a proposal, I'll look at it, and then they ghost you. So I think actually the way around it is much higher up in the sales process, which is, I mean, obviously sending proposals only when they reach a certain stage. There are some companies that send them very early in the process and thus have a very low close rate because the buyer is just, window shopping or looking at pricing, and they're not a serious buyer. So I think that's one. I think the other one is just about not sending a proposal and sort of hoping that they read it and then following up with them. It's, if it reaches the stage where you need to send a proposal now, just like you would on any sales call, don't end it without next steps. Okay, so how is next Wednesday looking for you? Let's get the meeting in the calendar so that I can present you the proposal. We can walk through it. And then if you have any questions, go from there. And then I'll send it to you afterwards so you can forward it to people on your team. That's just one of those like small process changes that can have such a huge impact on your close rate. Because you'd be surprised at how many people still do this over email and then send the proposal and then wonder why people aren't getting back to them. Now, because you can track it in Proposify and see like, did they open it? And what sections did they actually read? How much time did they spend on the pricing section or what have you? It arms you with more information so you know if they are actually looking at it and where they're looking at it. But again, I wouldn't leave it to chance. I would walk through it with them so that you're not just getting them to like go straight to pricing and go, oh, that's a lot, and move on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, if you incorporate a mutual action plan into your process, and part of that is, okay, we, send the proposal and we have a post-proposal review call with the champion, the, broader buying committee, and building that into the process. I can see obviously how that improves the the close rate, 52% higher close rate with revisions. Though, I mean, what leader does not want that? That's pretty significant. So yeah, if anybody wants to read that guide, I will link to it in the promotional material for this podcast episode, because there's a lot more stats in there that I thought were pretty interesting. And I could probably spend another hour talking about that. But Kyle, I know that you are a busy CEO and have a lot of other things to do other than talk with us. So I think we'll wrap up here unless there's anything else that you wanted to add before we sign off.
No, I really appreciate having me on. Normally, I mean, it's our last summer Friday at the company where we take the afternoons off. I do actually happen to have a call lined up after this, but ordinarily I would talk with you all afternoon.
Well, to Nova Scotians, we have a gift for gab. I think that's part of
That's right.
being from our neck of the woods. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and really appreciate it. And yeah, all the insight that you shared.
Yeah. Thanks, Kyle. We appreciate it.
Thank you.